What's up, everybody? Welcome to BioS 3 Raw TV. It's fix this camera. I'm gonna make that shit square. Alright, so let's you guys see the title. Coming clean about diuretics. Well, let's have a discussion about diuretics. What are diuretics? For those of you that don't know what they are, hopefully if you're tuning into this because you saw this, you know what they are. But if you're not and you're just curious as to what a diuretic is, diuretic is usually a medication. It could be a natural diuretic, something herbal like dandelion or something like that, that will remove excess body water, edema. Okay? Now they range from something like dandelion root, which is very mild. Like women use it when they menstruate a lot of times to keep the bloat down. Something like that, which is a single herbal version of a diuretic, to something that is more like a herbal, natural stacked diuretic that has other things like uva ursi and things in there, dandelion, etc. And some of these products have many, like 5, 6, 10 different diuretic type herbs in it, all the way to very, very dangerous hardcore medications that people take for things like high blood pressure, edema, etc. that bodybuilders are using without having these issues. Now, let's start with the dandelion root. Something very, you can buy it at like CVS, you can buy it at like Whole Foods, you can buy it at Wegmans, you can buy it at the grocery stores, you can buy it everywhere, and the different vitamin shops and stuff like that too. It is very mild. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I know a lot of people that have tried it throughout the years. I myself never tried dandelion by itself. But in general, people don't really see much from it. I think a lot of people get a placebo effect from it. Now, I'm sure that the more you take of it, there's more of a diuretic effect. And I'm sure that, when people read the research on it and read the data that's actually been published on dandelion root, they get in their heads that something's going to happen and they wind up drinking a little more water, peeing a little more, and they're like, oh, I was working like crazy. I've never seen anything more than a very mild effect that was barely noticeable in general. Now, these other ones, right? There was one called Expel. There was one called Taraxetone. I used one of these. Actually, I've used these a couple times. But I used one in a way for a competition one time because I couldn't get the prescription diuretics. Now, we're going to get back to the prescription diuretics in a second. But without the prescription diuretics, the guy that I was working with, the coach, was like, hey, you can use this herbal diuretic and just double the dose of it. Now, I'm not suggesting this. Do not do this. Follow label instructions, okay? I did exactly what he said. I doubled the dose. I gotta fix this camera angle again. Make that shit square. I want to make sure that thing's square behind my head. Got a little OCD about it. So I doubled the dose of these diuretics. And I started to cramp up. I wound up going to the bathroom. I was literally peeing. I think I timed it every 3 minutes. And I had to drive from my house in Kensington to Baltimore to go to the show at this point. I couldn't drive because I couldn't stop peeing every 3 minutes. So they were super powerful. When they doubled the dose, I was like, man, these things are probably hitting me harder than some of the prescription diuretics that I've used in the past. And it was to the point where I was actually kind of concerned from it because I had taken 2 doses and I had one more at night. There was actually caffeine in it too, which also was a diuretic. So I took that final dose and I actually cramped up. I had 1 quad cramped and 1 hamstring cramped. Now, I don't know if you've ever had that happen, but basically you have the muscles on top and the muscles on the bottom. When they cramp, you can't move. Because you can't unbend one leg because it's locked. This one, if you unbend it, that your hamstring is cramping, it completely cramps the hamstring. I couldn't get out of bed. I was like laying in bed, trying to figure out how to roll to my side and like throw my leg, like leave my leg extended, hit the floor with it and try to stretch. And I put some salt in my body and some salt and some water, and it cured that very quickly. So I will say that despite the herbal diuretics being possibly dangerous, it seemed like it was very easy to remedy it by putting more salt and water in my body. That being said, I still don't recommend taking these things, period. All right? And I definitely don't recommend doubling the dose, period. Because you can get yourself into trouble. I was stupid about it and almost did get myself in trouble. Now, that being said, let's talk about the prescription diuretics, which is why we're here talking about this in general. Now, recently, people have come out all over the place online, which a woman died recently due to diuretic use. And a lot of people popped up out of the blue talking about these different coaches and their diuretic programs and their protocols and shit. And I was like horrified by what I saw. I was horrified because I know where this protocol came from. I've seen it before. And it was one of those things where it was more of a theory than you should do this. And that's pretty much where it was left that I thought. But apparently people are doing it and it's causing some really bad reactions and some people are dying from it. Now, the diuretics that I personally used, I never used a prescription diuretic until 2006. The Body Rock. 2006 at the Body Rock, I was working with Brad Hollabaugh. Now, Brad has passed away. So I guess it's okay to talk about this stuff. Brad had actually told me to take Diazide. So I secured some Diazide, and I took the Diazide. I had no complications. Up to that point, it was the best look I ever had. He had me use it a certain way that I feel like is not only safe, but effective. And it was more about him teaching me the respect for these diuretics, because these diuretics can get you in trouble really quickly. So I learned real quick from the jump that if you're going to start messing with these things, you need to be aware that you can get yourself in trouble really fast, and you could die messing with these things. Now, that being said, had no issues there. That was 2005, 2006. 2007, I start working with another coach. Well, not really a coach, but a friend of mine. And he has something that I'd never really heard of. Well, I'd never used, but I'd heard of, called Aldactone. Now, the Aldactone, he had me start a few days out from the show. Now, what was interesting was when I started this Aldactone, I looked a certain way, and I started to increase, urination, and I started to look better and better. By Friday, I was like, okay, I look pretty good. Saturday of the show, I woke up completely flat. I mean, there was like, it was like overnight, my body completely changed. And now, usually when I flatten out, I may, come down a little bit in fullness and hardness and size-wise, but I'll be harder and drier. That's not what happened. Everything was just botched. And I couldn't believe it. I looked smaller, skinnier, fatter. It was like crazy what happened to my body. And we were feeding me like pancakes, all kinds of shit to try to combat that diuretic. And that fucking didn't work at all. It took a few days after the show, like 3 days roughly, for my body process that diuretic, and it stopped working. So just taking the pills for a few days had a 3 or 4 day lag time after you stopped taking them. They kept working. And I realized, like, this thing, too hard to control. Right? Lasix for me, too hard to control. Like, I've read about these long-acting diuretics. To me, too hard to control, not worth it, ruin all your work, stupid. I went back to the drawing board, and what I did was, 2 weeks later, I had another show in 2007. I took over my own prep. I got a little bit leaner, and what I did was I used the Diazide, and all of a sudden, I was in the heavyweight division, placing second, a close second, as opposed to getting my doors blown off in the light heavyweight. So I went up a weight class, and then did much better based on the fact that I was using those fast-acting diuretics that I knew I could control and I respected. So I continued when I could get diuretics to use a Diazide. So that's the main one that, for me, that I was using. I'm not suggesting anybody use these for off-label use. These are prescription-only diuretics. I'm telling you what I did in the past many years ago that I would never do again. I suggest you don't do now, because if you get yourself in trouble with these diuretics, you can kill yourself. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is not a joke. So I learned very quickly, very early on, that the couple things that could really kill you now in bodybuilding, one was insulin if you use it wrong. The other one is diuretics. Now, what's happening now is these coaches, gurus, whatever, are stacking diuretics. Now, here's the thing. Diazide itself is a stacked diuretic. It's 2 diuretics in one. Hydrochlorothiazide, I can never pronounce it, triandamine. When they combine those together, that makes the drug Diazide. If you have hydrochlorothiazide without the other one, it's just hydrochlorothiazide. It changes the activity when you take those Diazide, because it has 2 together in it. So if you're taking Diazide plus Lasix, you're now taking 3 diuretics. If you're taking Diazide plus Aldactone, Aldactazide, which is Aldactone and Diazide together, right? They have stacking diuretics. So I guess theoretically you can say, well, if they make them stacked already, then it's okay to stack them. Like, that's the mindset, right? Realistically, though, what these diuretics are for, they're for the average person who has a medical condition, who may not only not stop the behaviors that keep them ill, but could have a genetic predisposition to keep them ill, that even if they stop, let's say they lost weight and they cleaned up their diet, their blood pressure is still high. They give them hydrochlorothiazide, the blood pressure comes down. So therefore, the person is not going to cut out, or they've already cut the stuff out, the pill helps them. Other people, they go back to the doctor and say, have you cut your salt down? No, ha 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 ha. And the doctor's like, fuck it, you're going to die. So here's this pill. It'll remove excess water and sodium as well, because you're not going to fucking stop doing what you're doing. Well, that's not the same thing as a bodybuilder who reduces their sodium, cuts their water, and then takes this pill on top of it. Like, that's a recipe for disaster. Now, again, not saying you should or shouldn't use diuretics like a dandelion or whatever the case may be, but I'm saying if you are thinking about taking a prescription diuretic, really understand how these things work. Because I'm telling you, these gurus, these trainers, gurus, coaches, or whatever, they don't really know. It's an experiment. And they don't know how your body's going to react to someone else's. My body, I can take very little of something and get a good reaction. So when I took the Aldactone that guy told me to take, I was taking too much of it and got a further reaction, a bigger reaction. Now, I didn't dehydrate to the point where I would pass out or go to the hospital, but it destroyed my physique. Had I taken another tablet like he told me, that might have been bad. I might have wound up in the hospital because it took days for that stuff to come out of my system. So I kind of stepped back and looked at it and said, look, you know, the idea is get in shape as best you can. Try to get as shredded as you can. When you pull water last minute, you're not going to need to take a diuretic. Now, the diuretics come into play a lot of times when guys are out of shape or they're trying to make a weight class. My advice is try to make that weight class way ahead of time. Don't wait till the last minute to lose the weight. And don't wait till the last minute to try to get in shape. Then you won't have to do these last minute voodoo things. Because I'll tell you what, realistically, from the people that I have seen throughout the years use these things, myself included, it's not even a 50-50 shot that they work properly. I'd say there's probably a 20%, 25% shot that you might actually get this thing to work right. And get this, if you get it to work right now and you try the same thing for the next show, it may not work. Like, the diuretics are so unpredictable that I've seen pros take handfuls of shit, throw them in their mouth without even counting them. So if you think people are out there, you know, like, 2 milligrams of this, 5 milligrams, no, they're just taking handfuls of shit and saying, okay, well, we'll see what works and what doesn't. They wind up in the hospital, cool, they get a fucking IV, they come back and they try it again a couple weeks later. We had an individual that passed out at one of the shows here in Maryland. She was taken to the hospital. She came back and finished the competition. And she had passed out the week before at the Delaware. Same thing from the diuretic use. She went and got rehydrated, came to the show and finished the show. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, you've been to the hospital twice in 2 weeks for taking diuretics. You obviously don't know how to use them, or your body's just fucking spastic with them. Who knows what's going on? But we had another individual, a local competitor who used to be pretty prevalent around here, fucking went face down, boom, just hit the floor right next to me backstage. He was taking Lasix. He didn't realize that the Lasix is a loop diuretic and it was going to continue working, so he took it 2-3 days ahead of time, stopped taking it the morning of the show, figured it'd be out of his system and it wouldn't affect him. And he's laying down on the floor with Seth Feroce holding him up, trying to put water and fucking salt in his mouth to bring him back. Like, this is not something that is like, wow, this really happens. Mohammed Benaziza. Shit, I was barely a competitor when he died on stage. Porter Cottrell, who was a fireman, was doing fucking CPR on him. He died right there. Momo died on stage. Lavroni told me, he's described the situation. He was standing right there when Muhammad died. Right? And this is not like something that, I mean, Paul Dillette froze up. I'm sure you can find the pictures online. Seized up. His entire body seized up on the Arnold stage, and he had to be carried off by like 5 or 6 guys. They tried to pick him up and carry him off. He was frozen like a statue. All his body parts locked up. So, like, this has happened, and they don't talk about it. I know another competitor, he was just about dead. And the coach was still trying to pump him full of diuretics. And luckily, his life was saved, and he wasn't even going to win the show. He wasn't even top 5. They're still trying to pump him full of diuretics. So I definitely think there's some dangerous shit that goes on out there, and you should be aware of it. I do not think diuretics are a part of bodybuilding. I do think that they're used, and I do think there are people out there that use them responsibly and to the safest way possible, but that still doesn't mean they're safe. Using them responsible means, like, look, I've cut down as many ways possible as to kill myself with it, but I still might kill myself with it. That doesn't mean that it's safe or responsible to use. It just means that you're doing it the safest way possible, which, I'll be honest with you, I mean, realistically, is that trophy really worth it? Is that plastic trophy really worth it? Right? Or is that $2,000 if you're a pro to win that show, that small show, is that really worth it? You know, you spend more than $2,000 on drugs a year, you know, and you're sitting here trying to kill yourself with diuretics to win $2,000. That really isn't going to make a dent for what you spent for the contest to begin with. You know, so be aware, guys. I think there's some shady shit going on out there. I do know coaches do this shit. I do know that they not only supply the protocols, but they supply the drugs a lot of times too, which is fucking, I think that's absolutely sickening. I don't think that's a good idea from many, many different directions. And I've lost a lot of clients where people inquire and they'll say, hey, can you supply this? Can you supply that? I'm like, no. They say, well, you know, so-and-so said they can. I'll go fucking train with so-and-so. You know, like, it's a real problem that I hope, now that it's exposed, people do their own research and figure stuff out and understand that this is not new. Hopefully it goes away, but there's a lot of people that haven't spoken up, and I hope that they do real soon. BossingTraining@gmail.com. Leave comments down below, but don't fight. BossingTraining.com is a blog. It's a Speak Up Real Soon bicep, and we are out.